Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're Masechet Yevamot daf Pei Zayin. We are going to begin on the bottom of Pei Vav Amud Beis by the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says, if you have a Bas Yisrael, Shenises Kohen, she's completely married to a Kohen, at that point, Toich B'Truma. We now will allow her to eat Truma, because she's now living with her husband, and her husband's a Kohen. Now what happens if Mace? What if this first husband dies, who's a Kohen? However, V'lo Himenu Ben, but they had a child together, and they have a healthy, living child. So Toich B'Truma. So even though her husband, who's a Kohen, is no longer alive, but since she has a son by him, or a daughter, so therefore the din is that she can still eat Truma. Now, she is no longer married, but she's eating Truma. Imagine Nises Levi. Then she decides to marry someone else. She marries a Levi. So at this time, now Toich B'Maiser. A Levi eats Maiser Rishon, so she's allowed to eat Maiser Rishon. However, Rashi says, V'lo B'Truma, Tahadar Havizara, because she's now married to a Levi who is not allowed to eat Truma, so too she loses this right of being able to eat Truma, but again, since she's married to a Levi, she can eat Maiser Rishon. Now what happens if, unfortunately, Mace, her second husband, who is a Levi, dies, V'lo Himenu Ben, and she has a son with him, so Toich B'Maiser. Similar to the din of Truma, so if a person is married to a Levi and they have a child together, even though the Levi dies, she can continue eating Maiser because of the child. Now, Nises Yisrael, so she's not married anymore because her second husband died. And then, whether or not this is actually halakhically allowed, if you have two husbands that have died, but just understanding academically, the Mishnah discusses Nises Yisrael. Let's say now she marries a third man, but now she's a Yisrael marrying Bas Yisrael marrying Yisrael. So at that point, she can't eat anything, not Truma, and also not Maiser Rishon. Even though she does have children from a Kohen and from a Levi husband, she's still not allowed to eat Truma or Maiser because she's married now to a Yisrael. Fine. Okay. So now the Mishnah discusses what happens. Mace, now the third husband dies, V'lo Himenu Ben, and she has a child with the man. So lo Toich B'Truma Maiser. That boy still links her to this Yisrael, so therefore she still cannot eat Truma or Maiser. Mace, let's say Mace Benah, her child dies Yisrael, so Toich B'Maiser. So now she reverts back to her original status of when she was able to eat Maiser Rishon. Since she's not married to the Yisrael because he died, and the child also died, so therefore all you have left is her going back to her son, who is a Levi, because his father was a Levi. So therefore she can eat Maiser Rishon. Mace Benel Levi, let's say again also her child from Levi dies, then Toich B'Truma. Then we allow her to eat Truma again because she has a son from her original husband who was a Kohen. Mace Benel Kohen, of course, tragically, all her three husbands die, and her three sons from each of those respective men died. So then, in that situation, again, she will no longer be able to eat Truma because she no longer has she's not married to the Kohen, and she doesn't have a child from a Kohen. She can't eat Maiser Rishon because her second husband died, and she doesn't have a child anymore. That child died. It's only when the child is still alive that links her to that person. As we continue to Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. Bas Kohen. Now, we were talking about a Bas Yisrael. So the starting point for Bas Yisrael is that she is not allowed to eat Truma, she can't eat Maiser Rishon, but if she marries a Kohen Levi, then she could. Now it's the opposite way. You have a Bas Kohen. Now, Bas Kohen, right now, her whole life, she's been eating Truma. But now she decides to get married. She needs to Yisrael. So when she is now fully married to Yisrael, lo Toich B'Truma. We no longer allow her to eat Truma because she's in the house of Yisrael. Now, Mace, let's say the Yisrael dies, V'lo Himenu Ben, but she had a son from him, again, still lo Toich B'Truma, due to her son, who was a product from this man who is a non-Kohen, who's a Yisrael, so she cannot eat Truma. Nises, let's say this Bas Kohen gets remarried, and she marries a Levi, so Toich B'Maiser. So at this point, she now may eat Maiser. Of course, she still cannot eat Truma. Mace, let's say this Levi dies, v'lo himenu ben, but they had a child together, so still teichel b'maiser, she could still eat the maiser rishon. Nisis l'kohen, and now her third husband, she decides to marry a kohen. She's a kohen. She said, you know what? Third time, might as well marry a kohen just like me. So teichel b'truma. At that point, because now she's married to a kohen, she can now eat truma, and like she did before she was even married the first time. Mace, let's say the kohen dies, her third husband, v'lo himenu ben, but she had a child with him, still teichel b'truma. Now Mace b'na mekayin. Let's say the child which linked her to her third husband was a kohen. He dies, so lo teichel b'truma. She's not allowed to eat truma. Mace b'na Levi. If let's say the child from Levi dies, now lo teichel b'maiser. She cannot eat maiser rishon either. And then finally, Mace b'na Yisrael. If the third child is this is the big chiddush, that if let's say this bas kohen, her third child dies, who was from Yisrael. So what happened? Her three husbands died, and all three children died. So choser beis avia, she actually is able to go back to her father's house, which l'chayra sounds like she's allowed to go back and eat truma, like she did before she started off getting married, because there's nothing linking her to any of her husbands, because all these children have died. And this the pasuk says, so just like when she was in her youth, she can go back to her father's house and she can eat from the bread, namely the truma, from her father. So now let's understand this Mishnah better by looking into the Gemara. Gemara says like this. So Meis b'na Levi. So he said, if let's say the child that she had from Levi died, so teichel b'truma. We say she's allowed to eat truma. Dahadra achla mishum b'na. Manon, how do we know that she can go back and once again continue to eat truma? Again, her Kohen husband had also died. But now that the Levi is no longer in the picture, the din is that she's allowed to eat truma again because of the fact of her husband. So again, we're talking about a Bas Yisrael who originally married a Kohen and then married a Levi, then married a Yisrael, then the Yisrael died, the Levi died, the Kohen died, the Levi died. So it said in the last line that at that point, once the Levi died, Yisrael died, and there's no children, so teichel b'truma, so she's allowed to eat truma because she still has a son who is a Kohen. So Manon, how do we know that that's the case? Mishum b'na, that even though normally we say yes, if she's married, Bas Yisrael is married to a Kohen, and they have a child, and then the father dies, the husband dies, she can eat truma. But this is a bigger chiddush, because there was a stage where she could eat truma because of this, but then she ended up losing that because she married a Levi and then Yisrael. So how do we know that she can actually be chayzeres to start eating truma again because of her son? So the Gemara says as follows. Menolan, says Rashi, that she ended up marrying a non-Kohen, Umeis, and then the Zar died, so she can go back and eat truma because of her son. So Omer Rav Abba, Omer Rav, Bas Uvas. So he says it's based on the words Bas Uvas. Says Rashi, Uvas Kohen Kiseh Almana Gerusha. And that's Karebi Kaman, it's Karebi Akiva. So like him, the Darsh Vave, that he darshans Vavin. So the fact that there's an extra Vav, so he says that's a drasha to be able to tell us that this is the din, that even in this situation, she's allowed to eat truma because of her child. Afil Tamer Rabbanan. The truth is, this is not necessarily only like the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. Really, it's possible Afil Tamer Rabbanan. Kula Uvas Krayiserahu. The truth is, it's not just the Vav, but the entire context is extra, and therefore, even they hold it can be used as a drasha. Rashi explains how we see this as extra. Taraban. Now, Kashicha Zeres, when we say this din, that she can go back to her Shicha Zeres, and Rashi says Akrakoi, this is going back on the pasuk, Ubas Koin Kisei Almana Gerusha V'zer Einla, if she has no children, Kashicha Zeres Laveis Avia Choizeres Truma. So what does that mean? Choizeres Truma Aveda Choizeres Chaz V'Shaik. So even though when she's a Bas Kohen, she was originally eating truma, she was able to eat chaz v'shoik. However, when she now married a Bas Yisrael, and there V'zer Ein Law, she has no children, and she goes back to her father's house because her husband died, so she's allowed to eat truma. But she's only allowed to eat truma, she doesn't eat kodshim. She's not allowed to eat chaz v'shaik. So Rav Chisda, Ravina Bar Shila Mikra. How do we have what pasuk do we have to substantiate this? The Gemara is going to give two approaches. The pasuk says, "He betrumas hakadashim lo yisaychel." So it says that she's not allowed to eat these trumas kadashim. So b'mura min hakadashim lo yitaychel. It means the mura min hakadashim, which is referring to the chaz v'shaik. So the pasuk says specifically that in this situation, when she's chayzer, she cannot eat chaz v'shaik. Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Boravua mi lechem. Actually, we derive it from the word lechem, v'loy kol lechem. Not the fact that it says it, it sounds like it's excluding. So prad l'chaz v'shaik, it means that she can eat the bread, but not the chaz v'shaik. She can eat the truma, which comes to exclude the chaz v'shaik. So maskevlo Rami bar Chama. So he asks the question: Ema prat l'hafaras nadarim. Maybe it has nothing to do with kachim. Maybe the din is, in fact, she is allowed to eat chaz v'shaik. But all it's coming to tell you is maybe she will not go back for hafaras nadarim, that her father no longer has any rights for that. And Rashi says, "V'lo tema ki heichadil inin truma hadra l'milsa kamaisa tehadra namu inin nadarim." So Amarava kfar paska Tana de Rabbi Shmuel. The Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, the pasuk says, "V'neder al mother grusha yokum alel." Matam alel. What does that mean? V'lo mutsa'a mechal av. Isn't she removed from the category of her father? Umutsa mechal baal. She's removed from the category of her husband. Elohare, this pasuk has come to say, Shemasar av l'shluchi abal, that the father gives her over to the shluchim of the husband. O shemasru shluchi av l'shluchi abal, or the shluchi ha'av give her over to the shluchi abal. V'nis armula unis garsha b'derech. And as she is on the road traveling, she either gets divorced or widowed. So hechani karaba beis avia shelzu. Beis Baal Shalzu. How do we assess this situation? Is she considered to be Beis Avia or is she in Beis Baal? Because she's kind of like in limbo. So it doesn't matter, even though she's not entirely in the Reshus Baal. But once she's left the Reshus Ha'av, Shuv in Yochel Hafer L'Hafer. So we already see this clearly, that the time that the father has right to hafaras nadarim is dafka while she's still there. But once she's sent away, even if she's not even the Beis Baal yet, that already will remove him from the right of being able to be made for her nadarim. So it's a davar pashut then, that obviously when she's chayzeres, he's not going to be able to do hafaras nadarim. That we know. So therefore, that's not a chiddush. It must be coming to tell you chaz v'shaik. Rav Safra Omer, he says you can learn it from a different part. It says milechem avia toichel lechem v'lo basar. It says she's allowed to eat bread. Bread is not meat, right? So when it talks about truma is like bread. It's not meat. So the fact that it says lechem specifically, it's excluding basar. Okay. So that's another answer. Rav Papa Omer, a fourth pshat. Milechem avia toichel, from the bread of your father you should eat. Lechem hakono avia. It means only the bread that's acquired to your father. Because even though it's true that a kohen is allowed to eat chaz v'shok, it's not his. He's not kohen it. It's something in which he just has a right as a kohen to consume. But really, he's eating from shulchan gavoa, from Hashem's lofty table, so to speak. And therefore, it cannot be talking about, it's coming to exclude this, because only when it says melechem aviyah, it's the father's, like he owns it. He has a kinyan on truma. You can't say that on chaz v'shaik, so therefore it's coming to exclude chaz v'shaik. But Rabbi Omer, a fifth possibility, the eitz chazi atenu fe'ishaika truma toichlu ato v'nechu v'nosecha itach. You, your children, your daughters with you. So what are we going on from here? Zman she'itach, only when she's unmarried. In other words, when she's with you. But once she's no longer with you, you lose that right for chaz v'shaik. So therefore, that's what the pasuk is saying. So Amarav Ada Bar Ava Tana Kishi Chayzeres L'Beis Avia. When she goes back to her father's house, Chayzeres L'Truma V'Inu Chayzeres L'Chaz V'Shaik. Which is what we said before. That when it comes to the Bas Kohen who leaves her husband, because her husband died and she has no children, so she can eat Truma from her father when she goes back, but she cannot eat Chaz V'Shaik. However, b'shvil b'na chayzeres afachaz v'shaik. If let's say we're talking about a Bas Yisrael, and let's say she was married to, she's a Bas Yisrael, and she was married to a Kohen, and then the Kohen died, but she had a child from the Kohen, and then all of a sudden she marries, let's say, Yisrael. Now that Yisrael dies, and she has no children, or she had a child from the Yisrael, and the Yisrael child died, so she's chayzeres back to her husband's situation. In that case, chayzeres afachaz v'shaik. In that case, because she has a son who's a Kohen, so even though she's a Bas Yisrael, she can also eat chaz v'shaik. How do we know we could include that this is the case, that as long as this Bas Yisrael has a son who's a Kohen, that she can even eat chaz v'shaik? Mivabas, mia difala mina, hasam ksiva miyuta, hachaluk ksiva miyute. Okay, so question 6. Start with question 5, actually. Bas Kohen, which actually did questions 5 and 6. Okay, let's go slow. Question 5. A Bas Kohen, which is also going to be TA10, Shenises Yisrael. So a Bas Kohen married to a Yisrael. So at that point, she can no longer eat Truma. Umes. However, her husband, who's Yisrael, died. So now, which means that she can, so the question is, Him chayzeres le'echel b'truma v'kachim. Do we say, this is actually only question 5, is she allowed to eat truma and kachim? So the answer is yes. If it's a Bas Kohen, and she was married to Yisrael, and the Yisrael died, so she goes back to her father to be able to eat truma, but we said, but not for chaza, not for chaz v'shaik. However, that's what it says here. Bas Kohen Yisrael chazes v'truma v'li l'kachim. However, a Bas Yisrael, let's read what it says over here. She yesh lo ben mikohen. She has a son from a Kohen, v'nisa Yisrael. She married Yisrael, and let's say her husband died, and then she marries Yisrael, and then that Yisrael dies. So because she still has a son who's from a Kohen, not only can she eat truma, she can even eat chaz v'shaik. And it's the same thing. The same question as TA10. Okay, let's go weiter. Let's look at question 6. What does it say here? Inyan yibum asamesim kachayim. Okay, this is, we didn't get to that yet. Okay, weiter. I have to do that. Okay, let's see the 2 dots. Bas Kohen shenises Yisrael. So Tanurbanan. So Bas Kohen who marries Yisrael. So we said this is the whole case on the top of the Amud. What the din is that when she's married to Yisrael, she can't eat truma anymore. Tanurbanan. V'shava el bi savia. So he said that, let's say all these people die, so she goes back to her father's house when she originally was able to eat truma. So prat l'shemeres yavam. So he said that's coming to exclude if, let's say, she's a shemeres yavam. So she's not really going back to her father's house because her husband died and they were childless, so she's zokuk liyavam. So therefore, that's not considered to be going back to your father's house. Kinureha, when it says that, is prat l'muberes. It's coming to exclude that if she's pregnant. Now, even though if she actually has the child, that will be enough to have this din. Says Rashi, Kinureha bizmanchihi rekonis keinureha prat l'muberes. The only time you go back entirely to your father to be able to eat truma is if she's completely empty. She's not even pregnant. When she's pregnant, she's not allowed to eat. She's still not allowed to eat truma because that baby is from a Yisrael. So even though she didn't actually have the child yet, she's still linked through this pregnancy to this man. So in a place where we did not say that she had a vlad from the first one, kivlad minasheni, that has the same din like the second one, well, poiter min yibum to pater from yibum, asa uber kiyolud. We make uber just like a pregnancy is just like it was born. In other words, if we don't say the shlo asa vlad min arishin kivlad minasheni, let's look at Rashi. V'lomli kra. Why do you need a pasuk to tell you that if she's pregnant to a Yisrael that she doesn't eat truma? So nises echad. Let's say she marries one guy v'yoldalo, and she gives birth, umes, and then dies. V'nises la'achar, she marries a second guy, umes, below banim, and now the second one, she dies without children. Sricha yibum, we say that she still needs yibum. Below pater vlad sheishel min harishon. We don't say that she's pater because of the vlad that she had originally. So this is an interesting chiddush, that even though she may have had a child originally, right? It says Rashi, "B'makam shelo asa vlad min harishon kivlad min hasheni nises le'echad v'yodel umes." So let's say she had a child with her first husband, and now her husband's no longer in the picture, and now she marries a second guy, and she doesn't have kids. We say that if her second husband dies, that she's still Zakal Yibam. Well, why? If in fact we should say that she had a child from the first one, we don't care. We still say that, again, let's just read the words. We don't consider the first child like the second child to pater her le'poitrim in a yibum. She still has to do yibum. Nonetheless, aser uber kiyolud, says Rashi, she'im haisem uberes batura. If, let's say, this in the second marriage she didn't have a child, but she was pregnant, so the pregnancy alone is enough to pater from yibum. So makom she'asa vlad min harishon kivlad min hasheni, the situation where we say the first one is just like the second one, well, paisla min truma, that's enough to pass on from truma. It didn't shasa uber kiyolud. Then it should be a double pashut that the uber should be kiyolud. So therefore, we already know as a double pashut through this kavachemer that when it comes to a woman while she's pregnant, even though her husband, who is the Yisrael, dies, the fact that she's pregnant with this man, this bas kohen cannot eat truma. Where's his low? Mali also uber kiyolud l'inyan yibum. The only time we say that the first one isn't like the second one is by yibum. Shahari asa mesim kachayim, because we make mesim like they're alive. Nasa uber kiyolud. So maybe over there we're going to make the uber while she's pregnant. It's going to be ki'ilu like she's kiyolud, like she's born. This kid's born. The pas, therefore it's a Yisrael and pasal from truma. When in truma shul asa mesim kachayim. That's why you actually need this pasuk. Second Rashi, Meis Bala. Let's say her husband. So Meis Bala. Let's say first her husband died. So she had a child, but her husband died while she still had a child with him. So Harihu Koichai Zeres. At that moment, when her husband died, she had a child. So if she had a child when the husband died, so there's no din yibum. What happens if the child dies afterwards? So she has no children. It doesn't make any difference. In that situation, that's it. Once she's pater from yibum because she has a child, even if the child subsequently dies, that woman no longer does yibum. Bas kohen sheyoldem Yisrael. The bas kohen who gives birth to a kid who her husband was in Yisrael, umeis bal, then her husband dies, v'yachach b'na, and then afterwards her child dies, choser leveis aviyah. We say she goes back to her father's house. The kul nafki mikra b'shmaisen. So therefore, in that situation, even though what happened was first the husband died and then the child, we still say she can go back to eat truma. However, when it comes to yibum, we don't say she goes back and does yibum. So we see that there's a difference between them. So regarding yibum, asam mechayim mesim kachayim, we consider him like he's alive, and therefore because of that, as you said, if the husband dies and she still has a child, it's keilu. Even if the child dies, we consider him kachayim, like he's alive, and that she doesn't have to do yibum. And therefore, maybe that's why nasa uber kiyolud. When it comes to yibum, we say that pregnancy is enough to pater her from yibum. When it comes to truma, in which we don't say this din, because if the man dies and then the child dies, we say that she could still eat truma. So we don't say that the husband who's died is like alive. But no, he's not alive, and therefore she's allowed to revert and continue to eat truma in that situation. That's why that's why you need a pasuk to exclude when she's pregnant when it comes to truma. Okay, question 6. Leinin yibum asa mesim kachayim. Leinin truma lo asa mesim kachayim. Me'ema dinim haksuvim poi inyan yibum inyan truma. So this is how he says it. Regarding yibum, if the husband dies and then the child, harihu kaichi ve'eni uchayzeres l'savim. It's considered to be, I keep saying kaichi, kachai. You consider ki'ilu like he's alive, right? It's like the man is actually alive. And therefore, because of that, she is not going to do yibum. However, it comes to truma. If she's a bas kayin, she gives birth to a child from Israel, and the husband dies, then after the child dies, we don't say, oh, well, in that case, she wasn't allowed to eat truma, so she continues not to eat. No. We said that she can go back and eat truma. We don't say she goes back and does yibum. So we see that there's that huge distinction between the two. So you can't use this, you can't learn the Kabbalah, you need it as a pasuk to exclude. And you need both of these psukim of Mubaris and the pasuk of Zer Ein Law. The ikas rachman of Zer Ein Law, that when is she able to go back to her father when she has no kids? Mikara chad gufa. In the case where she originally was at her father's house, she was just one body, she didn't have any kids. Dash to trey gufi. And now here we have the situation of two bodies. Avol Mubaris. So that's the whole issue of it. If she has a child, Abel Mubaris, but if she's pregnant, Dimikar Chad Gufa Vahashta Chad Gufa, where there's only one body now and one then, because there's not another child here. Imatechel, you would think that she could still eat truma in this situation, because okay, fine, she's a bas Israel, but she's a bas kain, she's married to a Israel, but the reality is that you would think, okay, she's pregnant, but maybe that's not enough for her to not be able to eat truma. Sricha, no, that is considered to be enough that she no longer is allowed to eat truma even while she's pregnant. Because of Mikara Gufa Srika. So originally, as we continue to pay Zayin Beis, it's considered to be like a Gufa Srika. Rashi says Reika. She's completely empty. She's not pregnant. Bahashta Gufa Malia. Now she's full. She's pregnant. Of L'Sera Ein Lo Dimikar Gufa Srika. Bahashta Gufa Srika. Emalo Srika. However, in a situation where it starts off and ends the same way, maybe you would think the din would be different. Sricha. Simana Emerle Loy Nasa Masa Mamisa Nasa Veloy Nasa Bavlad Yibum Truma Yibum Truma Simon. Armale Rabbi Huda Midis Karata. Well, Rabbi, he said the following: Lo Nasa Mesim Kachayim Indian Yibum. We should actually say we should not make Mesim Kachayim regarding Yibum Kavachimer. In other words, like we said, if let's say you have a woman who has a child, her husband dies, and then the child dies, so there's no din yibum. Why? Because we say that the husband, even though he's dead, we consider it, the child is dead, we consider kachayim, like he's alive regarding yibum, that she doesn't do yibum. So just like she didn't do yibum while the child is alive, she doesn't have to do yibum even after he's dead. So we're making mesim kachayim. So the truth is we should not say that. Because Mama Makam Shasaf Vlad Min Arishain Kivlad Min Asheni will Paisim in Truma, where we said the first one is like the second one in that it will passel her from being able to eat Truma, but when it came to Truma, as we said, if the husband died and then the child died, so she goes back to her father's house, she's allowed to eat Truma. Why do we say that? Well, why don't we say that the child of the Israel, even though he's dead, it's like he's alive, and therefore she's not allowed to eat truma? We don't say that. So lo asamesim kachayim by truma. So makam shalosa vlad min rishon kevlad min asheni will put them in a yibum. We don't pater from yibum, even though it's true that she had a child from the first marriage, but since she doesn't have a child from the second marriage, in udin shal nasa mesim kachayim. So we should say that we're not going to make Mesim Kachayim. We're going to therefore, just like we're strict by Yibum, we're not going to pater from Yibum because the second marriage in which her husband died and they were childless, so she should have to do Yibum. So to over here, she should have to do Yibum as well. So what does that mean? Says Rashi, ben, the person who has a child, she doesn't have to do Yibum, and let's say she got married to someone else because she was allowed to, because she had a child. umeis bana, and then all of a sudden her child dies. So im tamer tachloitz, if we say she has to do chalitza, harihi misgana al bala, her new husband is going to be find it detestable. Hilkach al karchach bein ein lo b'shas misa kaimer v'har yeshloi. So therefore we say that if there ein lo b'shas misa kaimer v'har yeshlo, the whole issue is if there's no child or there is a child at the time of the man's death. So if she has a child, that's it. So it shows the importance of peace, that the Torah creates laws in order to promote peace. Now we look at the Kavachar maybe the other way around. When it comes to Yibum, as we said, we're strict that we say, oh, sorry, you have your second marriage, you did not have a child, so therefore you still have to do Yibum. So Asamesim Kachayim, nonetheless, we're lenient. And we say that once her child died, her husband died and they had a child, even though the child subsequently dies, we still considered this dead child kechayim. So malkum she'asa vlad min harishon kavlad min hasheni l'poisam min truma. So where we say that it's going to pass from truma, the first and the second, say din nasa mesim kechayim. So certainly when it comes to truma, we should say the same thing, that we should consider this child who has died just like he is alive, and therefore she should not be able to eat truma. So V'zer ein law tells you dafka in that situation when she has no kids. If she has no kids, then nasa vlad, and then minarishon, she has a child from the first. Kavlad minasheni le'inin yiba mikavachemer. So now we're going to say, maybe we should say v'ha'ein law v'nasa vlad minarishon. Let's say she doesn't have a child in the second marriage, but she has a child from the first. We should still say that she shouldn't have to do a yibum, which we still say you do, because her second marriage, where her husband died, she died without a child with him. So ma'ba makam shul asa mesim kachayim inin truma asa vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni. So makam shul asa mesim kachayim inin yibum inin shenasa vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni. So tamad loyim revein ein lo v'ha'ein lo. So again, because v'ha'ein lo, he did not have a child, and since there's no child at the second marriage, so therefore she has to do yibum. We should say that we should not passel. Just like when it came to, as we said, we consider the child who died as though he's alive, and therefore she doesn't have to do yibum, because at the time that her husband died, she had a child. So lo asavlad minarishan kivlad minasheni. So makam shalasa mesim kachayim inin truma, that we say that she could go back because her child, who is from Israel, died. And adin shalanasa v'lad minarishan kivlad minasheni tamud lemer ein la v'hayesh la. Hanulach yesh mutaros, hanulach yesh mutaros, hanulach yesh mutaros. So now we continue with the next parak, the 10th parak. Ha'isha shahalach ba'al medinas yam. So you have a woman whose husband went abroad to the other seas. Uvav, someone came back. V'yarmul, and they told her bad news. Meis balech, your husband's dead. So we know that in addition to a get, misas abal will allow her to get remarried, and that's what she did. V'nises, she got remarried. V'yachach bo bala, and then the bad news, or maybe good news, her original husband reappeared. So obviously he wasn't dead. So what does she do? She's married to this other guy. So teitz mizeh mizeh. So she has to actually leave both relationships. And Rashi says, kishar eshes ish shezinsa. It's just like any other situation of znus, that we say that she is usher to the baal and to the boil. And therefore, because of that, she has to leave both of them. Look at Rashi. It says, mishum dihi gufa daika adiyada bekushta umitzvah v'hadoloi dai kansile. The truth is, the fact that someone said, "Oh, your husband died," she should have been more meticulous in investigating into the situation. Since she didn't, we can ask her, and she has to leave the marriage, and she needs a get from both of them. Rashi says over here, "Im tirtzil hinasi la'acher." If she wants to marry someone else, the time the boy get misheni mefarish b'gemara. The Gemara is going to explain why you need to get from both of them. Okay, maybe just one. So it's really get mizeh mizeh. The ain lo ksuba. So the din is there's no ksuba over here. V'lo peros. There's no peros. which is referring to usually the nixim malug, v'loim zainas, that you don't sustain her with anything, v'lo. Also, when it comes to the worn out clothes, lo al neither man has to provide anything. Now, v'im natal mizu taxer. So let's say v'im natala mizu. So it says taxer v'havlad mamzer mizeh. So it says Rashi v'havlad mamzer mizeh im yolda misheni mamzer gomer. If she had a kid from the second relationship, it's definitely a mamzer because she was married. V'im shuv techziro rishain. If let's say she goes back to her original husband, v'yolda lo havi mamzer midivrayim. That's considered to be a mamzer midrabanan. Okay. V'lo zeh v'zeh matamula, and no one's allowed to become tummy to her if she's, let's say it's a kohen. V'lo zeh v'zeh zakayin, lo b'metziyasa v'masyodeha, v'lo afaris nedareha. So these men have no right to her found objects or her wages or annulling her vows. Let's say you have a woman, because of znus, she was puzzled to a kohen, or for that matter, a bas levi min hamaiser. So a bas levi is puzzled from meiser. Bas kohen min a truma. The in yarshin shall. So haisa bas Yisrael. So let me explain again. If this woman in question over here is a bas Yisrael, she's puzzled to marry a kohen. If this woman in question is a bas levi, she's not allowed to eat meiser rishon. Bas kohen, if she's a kohen, daughter kohen, min a truma, she's also to eat truma. Again, these are all kanas. It's a kanas that's placed upon her. Then yarshin shalzeh, yarshin shalzeh, yarshin is ksubasa. So we say they're not yarish the ksuba, and of course we already said that she doesn't get a ksuba, so we're just going to talk about that. The mesu echav shalzeh chosav lo miyabmin. So let's say they didn't have kids, so we don't require yibum, but they still have to do chalitza. Because of Exer, says Rashi, Shema Yomer Girish Zeh V'Nasa Zeh, etc. Rav Yossi Omer Ksubasa Al Nixi Bal Harishain. Actually, the ksuba should go on the first man. Rabbi Lezer Omer Harishon Zach Masiyasa Masiyah, therefore it's Nedereha. Because she really still married to the original man, so therefore the original man didn't lose his rights, like annulling vows, finding us the found objects of hers, or the work of her hands. Rav Shimon Omer Biyasa Oy Chalitzasa Mi'achiv Shorishain. If let's say there's Bia, and Rashi says Reisha Polig, the tiny lo miyamin. When it says that she cannot do yibum, if let's say one of these men died, if let's say instead one of the brothers does Bia or Chalitza, Shel Rishon Poteres Sarasa, that will pater the co-wife. V'eno Vlad mimenu mamzer. However, the child from this husband will not be considered to be a mamzer. Says Rashi, im hechziru rishon, if she goes back to her original husband, even though we said originally that there is a mamzer for the rishon midivrayim. Dim nisei shlober shus. We're going to talk about what this means. If let's say she got married shlober shus without permission, which we're actually going to see, it means that she had two witnesses. Muteres lachsolo. In that case, the original husband is allowed to go back. Rashi says, Nisa Shlober Shus based in Shaboi Shnei Eidim, two witnesses came, the Omer Meis Baalech, your husband died, and Nises Ma'atzma, she got married herself, Shahari Lo Haisa Srich Lo Heter Bastin. It means she didn't need Bastin's Heter because you had two witnesses. So therefore in that situation, because she's an Onus, it was really beyond her control, she didn't know, because you had two valid witnesses going to a court saying that your husband's dead, that should be sufficient. So muteris laxalo nises al pi bastin. Let's say she gets married through the words of a bastin. So this is actually going to be a case where she actually marries one of the when we're talking about rather al pi bastin means there's only one witness. So Taitse in that situation she has to leave this marriage. Upatur min a carbon. However, she's potter from bringing a carbon, says Rashi, because the yachid shasa b'hayras bastin potter. Lo nises al pi based, and let's say she didn't get married al pi based, and says Rashi el be'edim, rather through witnesses, that said that her husband died. So the din is that Nises al pi based teitze b'tumin a carbon. Lo nises al pi based teitze b'chayavas b'carbon. Here she will be chayav in a carbon. Yafa koyach based shapatim in a carbon. So it's interesting, the koyach of a based that gave her permission, which we're going to see means only with one witness, and the based made a hector and they were lenient. So we find that in there you don't have to bring a carbon. Hayroho based in lenase. So the Beis Din made a heter and said, okay, she can get married, the holcha, and she went for kilkula, and she had tashmish. So in that situation, chayavas with carbon. Shohetru el linase. The heter was only for her to get married, not for her to be engaged in licentious behavior such as tashmish. Now, miditani seifa nise shlober shos muteres lachsalois. This is a long Mishnah, but the Mishnah said that if she gets married, shlober shos, without permission, okay? Nises shalober shus, the nises shalober shus. So he said muteres lachsalo. She's allowed to go back to her first husband. Shalober shus based in el be'edim. What does it mean? It doesn't mean that she just did it without any permission. I mean, she did not need based in because there was two witnesses. So in that situation, we're lenient. So machlal the reisha b'shus based in. It must be the ratio says talking about Rishus Beis Din is Eid Echad. There's only one witness, and the one witness, the Beis Din was lenient. So Alma, what do we see? Eid Echad Naman. It must be that even one witness has some validity. Tanan Nami Huchsakuli Yois Ma Sian Aid Mipi Aid, that we have this concept that we will allow her to get married even if it's just with one witness. The Isha Mipi Isha, the Isha Mipi Evid, Mipi Shivcha, Alma Eid Echad Mehiman. So we see that we're lenient when it comes to one witness. Utanan Nami Eid Echad Omer Chalta Chalev. If you have one witness that says, "I know you ate chalev, this non-kosher fat," Omer Lo Chalti, and a person denies it and says no, so pater. Now time B'Diyar Lo Chalti. That's only because you denied it. Mashmaha Ishtik, if you're silent. So in that case, Mehiman, we're going to actually believe this one aid. So Eid Echad will be Neman. Alma Eid Echad Mehiman. Midaraisa. Even when it comes to Dini Daraisa, like being the din of eating chalev. So Manolan, how do we know that one witness is believed? If you're a shtika, the sanya. O hoido love chatasai v'lo shihiduhu acherim. Yochel afabi she'enu machishay yehi pater. Maybe you would think, even if you didn't contradict him, you'll be pater. Talmud lemer o hodoilav mikol makoy. So hechidami ilim asu trey. If there are two witnesses that said that you ate chalev v'lo kamacha shalhu, and you do not deny it, krolumli. All right, obviously, if you have two witnesses that said you ate chalev and you don't deny it, certainly going to be chayiv. Elav chad. It's coming to tell you that there was only one witness. It's when you do not contradict him, then that one witness is believed. Therefore, it's proof that one is believed. How do we know he's believed? Maybe it's not because we have so much validity and strength on this one witness. Rather, it's because of your own denial by your own seemingly admitting by being quiet. You have two people that says, "I know you ate fat," but who you deny it, potter. So we have a machlokus when there's two people that say, "I know you ate chalev," and you just downright deny it, whether or not you're chayiv. If you have two people that say, "I know that you murdered someone," lo yavihu lidei karban nakal. So if you have two witnesses that said you committed a huge crime, so those two witnesses are going to be believed. You don't care that you are going to deny it. Maybe you want to deny it because you don't want to be killed. The reality is we listen to the two Adim. So over here you should listen to two Adim. We don't care that in fact you disagree, you should still be chayiv. So therefore he holds your chayiv by two witnesses and you disagree, you still chayiv. So Ramoli said no. You could always say, "I was b'mezid." In other words, when it comes to a carbon, the only time you're chayav a carbon is when it's b'shaygig. You don't bring carbon as b'mezid. So you have a migu, you have the ability of a Malay Shakar. You could have simply just said, I was bemazed. And because of that, that's the reason why carbon is not the same thing. You're right. When it comes to Misa, 2 witnesses are believed. But there is something unique when it comes to a carbon that you don't always have to bring a carbon. So the fact that you deny it also should be enough that you should be able to be potter. Because you could also have said Mazin min potter. So Reisha, Mazin hoisi. So Reisha, top of Pei Chesam and Aleph, my taima kamachai Rabbanan. So why did the Rabbanan say that when you're quiet, that you're still chayiv? Is it because, says Rashi's believed? Says Rashi, Elohad mehimnu Rabbanan l'eid echad be'isha svarhu. That, okay, it's a logic that we believe one witness. But trei ba'alma, if there's 2, if there's 2 people and one person contradicts his belief, it called pater rabbanan, and the rabbanan pater in that situation. Rather, it must be coming to tell you the case of shtika ulcharetz because of shtika koida. So how do we know to believe in eid echad? That it has to do with an eid echad. They have nemanis. Maybe it's the whole din is because of shtika koida. Okay, we're going to stop there. We're going to continue talking about this on the next stop. Let's see. Maybe another question. Okay, we did that. TA, I think we already had before. Fine. TB. TB11, maybe. Ha'isha shalach bala. So nisei shalal pi based in el be'edim. So you don't need the based and you have witnesses. Lagami madina ka'anusa. How do we say that she's an anus? And regarding one, is she like a shaygeg? So on this, on some level, she's like an oinus, that she's allowed to go back to her husband. However, she's still chayiv in a carbon to shagegeges he lagabi carbon di iboyle la'amtuni. She should have been more careful. But because of that, she's still chayiv to bring a carbon. However, she's allowed to go back to her husband.